Okay, ko whiawhia te tau whalafa kia tatu kusine kua whalataha mai ke lata mo e whahoanga nei te tōru ne kua mai ke kai whalawhalanga me te Tagata Pulotu. Whakalawhalahi atu and greetings to all who are present here for our 5th Pulotu series seminar. Before we start, I just want to give a few housekeeping rules for us to be mindful of throughout. We would like to ask that everyone place their mics on mute unless you are participating in the discussion. And if you have any questions, you can place those in the chat, and those will be put forward to our presenter after his presentation. And once the presentation is done, we will have a Q&A session straight after. I would like to thank you all for taking time out of your day to be here with us, and to open us up with a blessing and word of prayer. I'd like to hand it over to our Matua Sanilu Liuvaie. Tukuitonga kia whakamana mole kia whangai ha tuturu wang nei ki he ioni. Go away.
Ia whakawelahi maha ki ina, pihani ke tō matarena niwe o siko mai ke whalataha mai ke whewhinei, ka mata hata tōro tō sanga nei me leongi. Let us pray. Lord God, our Heavenly Father, we come before you at this time with our hearts full of grace, gratitude and thanksgiving. You are the source from all wisdom flows from, and this afternoon as we come together as a community, Lord, to share information about those who have been privileged to undertake and complete tertiary education. We pray for thy loving blessing to be with us. Bless the speaker, Lord, so that he may be able to articulate his research. Bless also the participants so that we can take good information from the presentation. We also pray for our members that are yet to be with us. We're also mindful, Lord, that there are those in our community who have lost loved ones. We ask that you console and comfort them at this hour of need. Father, this is our prayer. We submit unto your holy name. Amen.
Amen. Whakawelahi he tō mana te whakamanuina mo e hawhaingi ke lata e mo he te tōru whakatalanga, po ke whalawhalanga he whalatu kumianga he tahi o te Tagata Pulotu. Ko e mga whenei, manaku ke tuku atu ai mai hata tōru a iloanga, koe hata tōru Tagata Pulotu ke lata e koe ahu nei, koe hana hi ngoa ko Anthony Liuvaie, haua ia he maanga ko Hakupatua, mo e whakakoe ke he motu nei ko Nisilani. So our Tagata Pulotu guest speaker for today is Anthony Liuvaie. He grew up in the beautiful village of Hakupatua, Niue, and his family moved to New Zealand in late 2000 to pursue better education in the land of milk and honey. He started his studies at Unitec, completing a national diploma in architectural technology before moving on to complete his Masters of Professional Architecture at Victoria University in Wellington in 2018. He is currently working in an architecture firm in Wellington as a senior architectural graduate who designs residential townhouses, apartments, and offices. His goal is also to become a registered architect, start his own business, and continue to pursue his design research further to make it a real-life project one day. Anthony enjoys playing rugby and staying active, getting involved in the local Niuean community here in Wellington, and hanging out with family and friends, and having a coffee and a beer or two. Manaku ke tuku atu, mo e whakawhilewe atu ke hata tōna matakainanga for Anthony Liuvaie. Tuku atu ai kia koe, ke whalawhala mai hawa te mana.
All right. Taki whalawhala hea tu tulos au awewhinei, whakawelai haka mai kim ke pātā mnolo te mga ke whanonga mai ke hako whamatalanga or presentation. Before I get started, I just want to say whalawhala to everyone, and what a privilege it is to actually, I guess, to be asked to be part of this this forum, or this presentation. For me personally, it's sort of unreal to be, I guess, to be within such high, I guess, how does Harrogate in terms of, I guess, being the same likes as everyone else here, all academics. So that's great, and I'm very privileged and honored to be able to present, and also just to be part of this discussion. So I'll be doing a presentation, so just bear with me, and hopefully, yeah, we'll get this going. All right. So my thesis, obviously I've completed that, but it's called Niue, and it's basically a resilient and sustainable architectural response to our current situation back home. I guess as most of us know about Niue, but a bit of background context of where it was, where Niue is, and basically the site that I'm looking at to develop, which is Aliluki and Alofi South. Niue's geography, generally, there's two sides. We've got the eastern side, which is a bit more rugged, and the western side, which is Feilo, and that's more of the I guess, the softer edge of Niue. Part of my focus of my research was obviously with cyclone, particularly Cyclone Heta, as I was there as well when that happened, and yeah, it definitely was an experience that I'll never forget. And I also wanted to, I guess, find a way of contributing to, I guess, make us more prepared in any future cyclones, for example. So some of the background context. So as we know, Niue is cyclone prone. Throughout my studies, I've sort of summarized that, if you can see on the cyclone prone image, that generally it's the western side that gets hit most by cyclones. As you can see, it's particularly Alofi South, Aliluki. And as you can see on that corner, it's sort of why it happened to in Aliluki was that in terms of the geography, that side there is sort of perpendicular to the direction of the cyclone. So therefore, it really amplifies, the waves and all that when it hit Alofi South. Just looking at some of the traditional housing, obviously Whalepola was, and also the Whale Tapu was one of the biggest sort of architecture back then. I'm also looking back to sort of pre-create Christianity and understanding the vernacular architecture in Niue, and that's basically like a Whale Luku. And these are some of the photos I took on my field studies back home. Another sort of, I guess, issue back home is there's a lot of abandoned houses. As you can see with my photo collage, and as some of us know, there's a lot of this happening, and that's due to, well, I'll talk about that later, but I guess that's due to the declining population and obviously people leaving the island. Getting closer towards this, I guess, the site, as you can see, Aliluki particularly was a very vibrant place. I still remember this as a kid going to Huanaki and all those cultural performances, and in the hospital. It was just it was a good memory. And obviously when Cyclone Heta hit, it basically demolished, I would say 90% of their whole infrastructure. As you can see on their photo on the right, the hospital, I mean, basically quite the majority of their whole area, including the apartments, the hospital, the Niue Hotel got demolished during the cyclone. And these are just some of the photos, I guess, which really highlights, that how strong the cyclone was. And this is actually a great photo, I think, in terms of showing our resilience. If you have a look at on the right side here, they say we will survive. And I think I really took that photo as as us Niueans, we're resilient people, and obviously we faced the cyclones before and all these adversities, but we always seem to come out on top. So really, really sort of look at this image and kind of gives me, I guess, a glimmer of hope in a way. And then currently, this is the site in North South. Obviously, this was taken in 2017. But as you can see, there's at the moment we've got a playground and just a place to store containers, and it's sort of a bit more barren now. I know it's which is definitely something that I really want to look at improving, as it's quite an important site in terms of the proximity to the airport, and also obviously try and to bring back some of the activities that were used in this area prior to Cyclone Hata, which is the Vanuatu Centre, to just try and make this place more vibrant. I guess based on those existing information, my thesis question ended up being, how can Niue rebuild its cultural identity and develop a more resilient and sustainable vernacular architectural response to its cyclone-prone environment? So that's my thesis question, really. With the project aims being to try to identify Niuean vernacular architecture. So I guess the traditional, what is Niuean architecture in essence? Secondly, is to develop and design a cultural center, evacuation center. And thirdly is, I guess, to create the aim is, I guess, with this research is to make us more resilient through infrastructure. And some of the design response, how I approached this was I started from a large scale to small scale. So firstly, looking at site development, looking at Liuvaie, and how we can, what some of the learnings that we took from Cyclone Hata and how to improve the site. That's phase one. Phase two is looking at vernacular architecture and also a cyclone resistant structure that responds to our cultural, all our cultural narrative, and also some of the natural landscape that's already on the island. And thirdly is, how do we engage community through all this process, and say if it's built, how do we keep that going and finding a more sustainable solution to build back home. Before I did my field research, I did some early iteration of this. Is, I guess, looking at the site, looking at ways of protecting, I guess, the main threat, which is the waves. Obviously, the wind is there by the waves. So just doing a quick iteration of how to stop the waves from getting inland. So if you can have a look at the image on the left, it's just looking at potentially looking at planting more trees, or two, looking at providing a more solid structure to stop the wave, or three, looking at building like a seawall. Obviously, with all these options comes pros and cons. So what happened next was, from that, sort of had looked into a bit more of an early iteration of the site. So if you have a look at that, I'm not sure if you can see the arrow, that's the road from the airport coming down to Liuvaie. And then this is sort of, I guess, the first iteration of, I guess, the urban design for this whole area. But that's all sort of done before, I guess, my field studies, which was one of the key aspects of making sure that whatever I design responded well to all these site response. So I did a field research, went back to Niue, and some of the key things to know about, I guess, with the site analysis is that unlike any other islands, Niue is prone to big waves during a cyclone, basically because of our terrain and how we are an atoll. Which means if you have a look at, I'm not sure if you can see my arrow, but over here, so with Niue, because it literally just drops as soon as you sort of go off the cliff, that basically is a point where all the energy of the wave builds up, and that's how we get those massive waves that goes all the way about 50 to 100 meters inland. You compare that to other low-lying atolls, like, for example, Samoa, Cook Island. The terrain, because it's all sand, it slowly subsides down, which means that it really stops the strength of the wave before it actually hits the mainland. So, in understanding that, we know that that's an existing, that's part of Niue, is that it has the potential to, whenever there's a cyclone, there's going to be big waves that comes through. So how do we deal with that? So through that analysis and looking at studying what happened after Aliluki, we sort of realized that it's the crevices really that that where all the waves came through. So identifying that, if you have a look at the high risk area and it's yellow, that sort of highlights where the waves came through and demolished most of the buildings. So and understanding that, we understand sort of how to plan ahead, understand where to place obviously some buildings or some temporary shelters, ensuring that they're placed, if they are to be placed, they're away from these yellow zones as shown in this image here. So from that, I guess I looked into basically 3 rationale, which is for Aliluki. If you look at zoning, number 1 is, so the design response is in the front, basically where the road is towards the coastal edge, that's deemed the red zone. So if you have a look at this, I guess this table here, for example, stuff that can be built there could just be shelters, temporary structure. That's, if it does get damaged, it's not a big cost to rebuild. Looking at zoning, looking to yellow zone, and that's more to do, and it's potentially looking at smaller housing, for example, that can build up there. And then the blue zone is probably, that's a safe place to rebuild houses as such if we need to. And secondly is obviously understanding that where the waves come through, is how do we mitigate the waves from completely coming in and destroying any of the infrastructure that we have. So number 2 is really looking at how do we stop that. So what I've proposed is provide a lot of plantation in these areas, trees, and that will dissipate the wave strength. So by the time it gets up to the top, it's just, it's only a small part that comes through. And thirdly is how do we, I guess, reconnect people to the site. By zoning it, we have separated, we've also added another road in here, which is away from all, I guess, the red zone, and allows a bit more easier passage through the site. Not just, I guess, that's looking at the site analysis, but secondly is looking at design strategies and also engaging the community. So part of that design process was engaging some of the key people that's obviously involved in the infrastructure side of things. So we did basically a community engagement where we looked at what are the best options for that moving forward. And basically the summary of that was planting the trees in that red zone area is probably the most sustainable and a cost-effective solution without the need to build any retaining walls as such, as we don't have, we potentially don't have the infrastructure or the money to do that. And from looking at that, I guess from the biggest coming down to, so if we were to go ahead with this site, what kind of spaces do we want in here? So, and from that, I did further investigation with not just the government, but also looking at schools, looking at different age groups, and basically provided simplified four uses that we can. So social space, cultural, education, and they basically sort of summarize what could have been done on site. So that's sort of the macro scale or the larger scale, looking at the site and identifying what's the risks and how do we work around those risks. So excuse me. So that's, I guess, the bigger scale. So if we're looking at, and then now I'm focusing more on the architecture scale. So looking at buildings. So again, this is done prior to my site studies, but just quickly looking at how do we incorporate our culture some of the natural resources that we have into the design. So, for example, we look at design process one, looking at using a taume as a narrative for the design, and how do we bring that into a building or a cultural center. One of the things I learned in terms of Niue and vernacular architecture was that we didn't really have I guess the architecture as such, because we had caves. So back then, matuas were just, with this cyclone that comes through, they just go hide in the caves, and that protected them. So there wasn't a need to build any buildings apart from wharelukus or wharepolas, but they were all temporary shelters while they were sort of working around their plantation, for example. So looking at the idea of the cave and how to bring that into architecture, and also looking at the village layout and how that comes through in terms of how do we build around that. And the last one was looking at the ovava tree and how do we take that and then create, I guess, a building out of that. And these are some of the early iterations that I had. I sort of taken the ovava idea as which I'll explain down the line why that was chosen as preferred option in terms of developing the design based on this. As you can look, as you can see, this the early concept design of a community center or building was taken from the ovava tree. As you can see, some of it's the roots connected down and from that and also this here is just a house or some sort of pavilion, which is taken from the idea of ovava tree and how that always gets grounded as it grows along. One of my, I guess, when I did my field study, one of the biggest parts that I wanted to know was there, I guess, an essence of the Niuean architect. What is an essence of the Niuean architect, Niuean building is? And part of that was interviewing matuas, which was one of the most successful things I think I've done when I went back. And basically the summary of that was, as I mentioned before, cave, that was back then pre-Christianity, that was the way, that was what protected them. So there was no need to build any buildings. Secondly, when they did, I guess, have any build wharepolas, they used to just build it around a lot of trees, and it's quite low as well. So they kind of protected them from their wind during cyclone season. Thirdly, they also looked at what was discussed was during cyclone they usually just go and break off a kafika tree or something, and then they just brace the wharepola when it's cyclone season. So it's sort of a reactive thing more than to the season. As mentioned before, also it's building it quite low also protects it from the wind. And then the other one, which was interesting, was which is some of the churches was built out of rocks. The walls were built out of rocks, which really made the, I guess, building quite strong and heavy. So that was from the Niuean perspective, looking outside of Niue into the general Pacific. These islands, particularly, they had their own methods that was tested through time of building their own, I guess, the buildings that worked really well with cyclone, because that's obviously a natural disaster that's out of our control. It's just how do we work with that? So if you ever look at the Vanuatu traditional house, it's basically a triangle shape and it's all tied to the ground, and it's all tied together and it's quite low. And an interesting story about that is that during one of the cyclones, I can't remember specifically when, but when they happened, a lot of the, I guess, the western or the normal houses sort of, the tin roof came off and had a lot of damage, whereas these remained intact and there was no damage to it. So it was an interesting observation from that, because it shows that the Vanuatu, they've through test of time, they've come up with an ingenious solution by building it low and everything connects to the ground. And that's very similar to, if you look at the Tongan traditional house, the Fijian bure, and then the Samoan whare. The biggest thing that I took out of this was how low it is to the ground, how connected it is to the ground, and also having that curve. The curve really helps with the wind, just allows the wind to go around it instead of, I guess if you have a flat surface, it's easy for the wind just to hit it. And 9 out of 10 times, Mother Nature was wind. So, without looking at far, like if we look within the Pacific, there's already these designs have been, done for generations, been tested for times, and without looking far, I've looked at these and used these as inspiration for, I guess, that influence the Niuean architecture, or what deems to be a Niuean architecture, and how does that look. Another thing to note with that is that a lot of these houses, they're not nailed, they're not fixed with bolts, so they're all tied together, which allowed movement. So, it's still, again, working with the wind, working with Mother Nature. So with tying it together, it allows movement, so nothing snaps. So the building, I guess, or the Feilo moves with the wind, and that's it's really valuable information to know when they're designing moving forward. So going back to the Liuvaie tree, so this is one of the key findings that I picked up when I went back home, and there's a great story behind this through just talking to the matuas, and also just talking to some of the community members when I went back home. The thing with the Liuvaie tree was, I guess, first of all, during Cyclone Hata, and after Cyclone Hata, the tree remained intact. Out of all the other trees, this was the only one that still had green leaves, and it was the only tree that, in my observation, that was still, I guess, still green and still alive. So I took that as, obviously, that's such a strong and powerful statement. It shows that this tree, through time, has I guess, developed its own system that can withstand cyclone. So how do we take that into, I guess, the architecture that I'm trying to create moving forward? Secondly, there's a lot of stories about people, especially in the Liuvaie South and Kifu, that I've heard that they had to hide in the roots during Cyclone Hata because of they were too late to escape, and the waves basically washed them up, and they had to hide in there during the whole duration, which protected them from obviously being washed away. So the narrative behind this, I guess, the Liuvaie tree is so strong that I had to look into this as the point of reference for the architecture that I'm trying to create. And some of, I guess, the summary, some of the important features of it is that every time it goes out, it always goes down to the ground. So the importance of connecting to the ground, which stops the wind, I guess, stop any building from flying up. So that's one of the most important aspects I took out of it in terms of the structure. And then, the more it goes out, the more it goes down, and it creates, so just trying to bring that into, I guess, the design. So from that, taking that idea and then looking at how do we introduce material into architecture. So instead of looking at the typical 4x2 timber frame walls, which generally doesn't work in this context, I looked at how do we introduce or try and use the idea of a Feilo and how things are tied and how they move. So from that, I kind of looked into bamboo as a viable material, and that can be used to express the architecture while using the Liuvaie tree as a narrative, for the design. Some of the key, and one of the great things about the bamboo is that it takes 35 years to grow. So that means that the turnover of the material is good. So you can grow it locally, for example, and then just transfer it and then build something out of it. Its strength to weight ratio, it's stronger than steel in terms of tension, which is crazy because it's just a natural. Bamboo is basically just big grass. So hearing that the information is quite amazing to see that the more you tend gets bended, the stronger it gets. So that really ties well back to the idea of their form, of their round form, and allowing movement, because the more it moves, it's been bamboo, the more it bends, the better it is. Another aspect of that is that it ties really well with our traditions and our culture in terms of us weaving. Like the basket. You look at some of the stuff at the seers that we do. There's a lot of weaving involved. So, and I think just looking at some of these images here really does reflect that. And so it was a really good opportunity to use bamboo as a material to produce this new, I guess, the Niue or new architecture, or an architecture that reflects Niue's culture. And one of the reasons why I didn't use, I guess, the Western building materials, if I can say, is that that's one of the leading causes in deaths during any natural disaster is man-made products, mainly tin roofing or timber. So that once that pulp flies off, and then that's usually that's how people usually gets injured, or worst case dies. That happens. So how do we go away from that, especially for and look for a sustainable solution back home? So from that, I had to try and test it out in a model, or to try and figure out what the Niuean architecture is. So, and one no better to use than the tawhikaniu. So that was one of the funny findings that I ended up with. I didn't mention this previously, but I never knew that I would be using tawhikaniu to create this architecture. Something that I got hiding when I was a kid is now something that's used, that's potentially used to explore what this new architecture could be. So it's just funny how things work. But by using that, it really mimicked, the use of bamboo. So from that, I did a lot of testing and modeling without using any thick, I guess, bolts. It's just everything all tied together. So in terms of materiality, just looking at kaniu or bamboo, rope, we're using pulu like how we usually traditionally. And then the foundations is probably the only thing that we need to introduce, like concrete, which is obviously outside of the sustainable system. So from that, just looked at, again, went back to the study of a Liuvaie tree. How do we mimic that to ensure that the structure will always remain intact to the ground? So that's basically a study of that and seeing how does the architecture do that, which is basically starting from the foundation, central core near the trunk, and every branch that goes out and it goes down, every branch that goes out and it goes down, and so forth. And that kind of is emphasized in this diagram, really. So by getting that framework of, I guess, the baseline of, and making sure that the main design driver is obviously the vernacular architecture of Liuvaie tree, but also looking at site and how do we respond to the cyclone, because that's one of the biggest threats to us is a cyclone. So from that, I moved on to, so how do we reintroduce this to the site? So it's just a quick site study, to know where the winds are coming, where the sun is, and the location, where do we position the building with the design in mind. So from that, so their placement, so you kind of see from there, this is the sort of the architecture form that I came out of the model that I did. And you kind of see sort of based on this site location over here, and if you get closer, you kind of understand sort of where the waves are coming, how to lay out the space, and how people are going to come through the site, for example. So this one here is for responding to disaster. So we know that the waves are going to be coming here. So how do we deal with that? Cyclone direction, the wind is usually, they come in all directions. So that doesn't really matter as such. Sensitive areas will be in the front because that's where all the waves will be hitting. So I guess that creates a response to the spatial design. Like all the important space will be at the back, and then all the sort of less important space will be in the front. Looking at day-to-day during a cultural center, looking at where the sun position is, looking where the winds are coming from, ocean winds, trading winds, and that will also determine the spatial layout as well. So there needs to be a constant check between the two. And then how does that connect to the wider site? From that, I guess if we use this as the primary space, this is sort of a study of a layout and putting the primary space. So I guess basically what I ended up with was all the primary space, which could be, the evacuation center will be in the center, and all the other sort of secondary and minor space could be at the edges, if you kind of look at that. So that's sort of just a diagrammatic study of that. So from that on, it's just going back to community engagement. How do we, I guess, engage the community in this whole thing? So with the bamboo, the whole idea is like they can grow it, or plant and grow it. 3 to 5 years will be into full maturity, and then they can use that, cut it down, which basically transport it and then construct it on site. So just using, and then so from that, I guess going back to the design. So this is sort of what I ended up with. This is the final model that I did, which again reflects all these design narrative of the Liuvaie tree, using bamboo, taking some aspects of the Vanuatu Whare, some of the Samoan Whare, the Tonga, the Fijian Bure, of that curve, using the weaving technique as a method of tying in the building together to create a more rigid structure. And then this is sort of what it looks like inside, potentially could look like inside. So it's a very organic type form, with again portraying the idea of the Liuvaie tree and this massive central core that ties everything together. And as it goes out, which creates a space similar to a Liuvaie tree, it ties down, the same thing. So within the space here could be the primary space, and that could be the most important stuff. And as you go out, it gets a bit more, obviously, secondary space and minor space, with all the entries being quite low. So there's like less likely for uplift and all that. And then that's basically my research, I guess, in a nutshell. So that's it. Thanks for I guess for bearing with me for a couple of minutes, and I hope you guys enjoy that. And if you have any questions, please do fire away.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Anthony. Just helping us understand the different phases that you went through with your research, and also how important Indigenous knowledge is in terms of influencing our people's ability to be more resilient. I love how you used the Liuvaie tree and the dome, and especially the Tafikaniu, that helped you build your resilience, even if it was to discipline you. But I love how the Kanius are easy to bend and weave. So I'd like to open it up to who, if you have any particular questions that you would like to put forward to Anthony. We have one here from Cora. Cora. Okay, so Cora's question was,
thank you for that. That was very, it was really exciting to hear all the kind of data you've gone through, even just all the drawings and stuff, because as a hiapo maker, I can see everything that you've done in pattern. And I've got my notebook here feverishly drawing up stuff. And so I was just wondering, are there any particular types of wrapping or binding patterns that you used or found in regards to making your models?
I guess the method I used was, which my nana taught me, was making a katatapoa. It's just up and down. That's the only sort of weaving that I know anyways from learning back home. So that's what I used for when I did this model.
Sorry, I have one more question to that then. And in regards to that, was there like a particular, do you know of, if there was like a style of binding that was used for Niuean housing? Yeah.
For Niue, not to my particular knowledge. I guess with the comments from the Matuas, a lot of for building, it wasn't, the weaving sort of wasn't used as much to hold the building together. Weaving was used for obviously arts and craft, but not to the extent of buildings. And my knowledge of weaving is not as, obviously there's a lot of room for improvement. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah, Koe Cora. We see Marie Buckley also has a question.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Ina. Well done, Anthony. That was terrific. It was a really comprehensive presentation, and I actually learned so much in there. And I'm glad too that you also involved the matua of the land as well, because, you know, we learned so much from our grandparents, and obviously they've taken down the stories from their parents and their grandparents, which is something that I'm really interested in. But yeah, having a background in real estate for 7 years, and I owned my own agency for half of that time, I actually got to see some amazing architecture, right? And one of the places that stood out for me was when I visited this place in Kolo, which is sort of maybe an hour out of Sydney as you're driving up north. And this house was actually, there are designs all around the world, but apparently there's only 3 in Australia. And this house was actually built into the landscape. So it was actually built into the, because I think Niue is made of limestone, yeah? The majority of it is limestone. So anyway, I was just thinking about, have you considered using the natural resources? I mean, obviously you would need to put very strong glass into that type of design, and you've obviously considered that is the best spot for it, considering that, you know, when the cyclones do hit, that is an impactful area, right? Whereas, say, the top of Niue on the other side of with the low and then Liku, isn't it, coming down on the west side? Had you considered, you know, those areas as well? It's not really that far from the airport if you're talking about in terms of getting supplies there. But you know, I just think it's brilliant, and yeah, I can certainly sort of help you with the, you know, the resources that I have access to here in Australia.
Oh, awesome. I guess just to add to that, so in terms of the site, part of the aim was to create a framework, obviously. So using a look as a site, but that can be adapted to anywhere in the coastal side, or potentially anywhere in the wider Pacific, of using that same, using plantation as a form of area, and then the placement of the building. It's just, that's one thing I learned, is that just using the by doing this, we kind of get a framework of how to deal with cyclone in a more sustainable way, without using concrete and
no, I understand. I just found it quite interesting, because there was no need for air conditioner, right? Because it was all sort of regulated by the sun and the heat, and so there was no need for any of that. Yeah, you would know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, for sure.
Good.
Yep.
Fantastic. But thank you. It was great. Thanks, Anthony. You finished it off with a bang.
Well,
yeah, Fraue.
Yeah, whakawelahi Marie, Tukuitonga Alana, and then Nuhi, and then after Nuhi we have Annette who has a question as well.
Thanks, Inna. Thank you, Anthony. I really enjoyed that talk. Like, I already had a feeling I was going to enjoy your talk, but it just took it to the next level today. So one of my questions is, have you been in talks with the government about actually getting something on board? And Inna, we need a directory. I think we need a directory of all of our people and the things that we're doing, because we're employing, I don't know who designed the new Whalefono. I'm just going to come out and say this, it's really ugly. And seeing your stuff, like seeing your, like this whole concept that you've created, I was like, how amazing would that be for us to have there? And, you know, not just as a like, you know, just like, oh, that's pretty, it's like functional as well. And the other thing I'm going to say is, if you're looking to put up something real and small, I'd like one of your little whales from bamboo on my place. So thank you.
No, thanks for that. Thanks for your comments. So with the government, I mean, that's probably the next stage I need to do, and there is definitely a lot of passion that I really need to push through to get this to become a real life project. I understand the value of it, and that's the feedback that I got from my reviewers when I did my presentation at uni as well. There's definitely intentions to try and push it through the government. It's just a matter of obviously myself pushing it through and continuing on. But yeah, if you do want a house like that, you know where to you know who to go to.
Koe malana tua tia koe manuhi.
Thanks, Anthony, for the presentation. I was interested. I like your model. I think it's really, really, you know, nice. And you're the first Niuean architecture I've met. I've met, and so it's really great to see that we've got somebody in that space. So I suppose for me, I can see the bones of what you're suggesting would be an ideal building that would be cyclone resistance. I suppose my question is, have you been able to progress? So that's the framework, right? That's kind of the frame. So would have been, have you been able to progress it to a more finished state so that we're able to have a look at it?
The answer is no. I guess after the presentation, after my uni and finishing all that, I haven't really focused on developing this design further. I've just on my end, I've just been focusing on trying to obviously get a bit of work experience and having a break before I sort of dive back into this. As I do want to probably spend the majority of my time to develop this further into something a bit more tangible.
Because it would be something that home builders could also look at, building something that's a little bit unique rather than the standard houses that do go up in Niue. So yeah, I'm really interested in your design. I'm also interested in the cost. The cost of putting up a house like that, anywhere. So it'd be really good to see at some stage that frame of the house into something more real, I suppose, finished.
Yeah,
finished. It'd be really good to see that.
Yep, no, that's definitely the goal, and that's the plan. Like and that's definitely something very different to obviously our normal perception of what a building is. But I think it's in terms of cyclone resistant structure, yes, that's a priority, but also culturally, for us Niueans, I did a study on how we live. Like, we have just a whale, a separate toilet, but we live outdoor. Like, we just have a small space to sleep in, but everything is connected to the outside. So with this sort of building, like, it we don't have those four walls and windows per se to separate us. It allows that connection inside and outside without, I guess, having that barrier or something that stops from, which also adds to the whole idea of what Marie was talking about with sustainability, and without the needing to pay heaps of power bill, for example, you know, everything is designed so we use the natural like sun, wind as our passive ventilation, etc.
Great work, thank you.
Lahi.
Go and Nuhi Tukuitonga next, and then John. Oh, Annette, if you can unmute your mic, Molly.
Yeah, go Anthony. I was just put in the chat earlier, adding to Marie's thoughts, if not aliluki, because it's, I guess, historically, it's a prone to damage. So although this is modern learning, how palatable is it with the government? So if not aliluki, where else on the island might you even place a sample structure?
Yeah, so
because seeing is believing, right?
Yeah,
and
sure.
I know of other engineers. I have a brother-in-law who's been an engineer in all types of engineering. It's been probably 12 years in the making, because it's all in framework, it's all in structure, and he too wants to use all of the sustainable resources, kafika or vava, driving his wife nutty because they still don't have an actual structure. And then I have a niece who's an architect / engineer. She too is designing. I wonder about collaboration with other Niue like-minded.
Yeah, so I guess to answer the first question around that, why I looked at aliluki was because that's one of the worst affected area. The worst case scenario, obviously, if we can come up with a solution for something that's, you know, that's I guess the worst case scenario part, that means we can take that framework and apply it to somewhere else, and then we know strip down and know from in terms of requirements based on the area. Because if you take it to like just trying to think of anywhere else in the South of Australia, for example, then at least we've got a framework that covers the worst case scenario.
Oh, at Alana's property, she's already offered. If I lalo, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, so there is definitely potential for this to be, I guess, taking the framework of the learnings from aliluki and using that as a design driver for if we do decide to take it to not just the south side, the Feilo, but Fahiuta, we can take that. And what the good thing about is that highly likely that we can remove the waves as one of the designing factors. So that just means we have to worry about the wind. For example. Secondly, in terms of collaboration, definitely, I mean, I'm so keen to.
Yeah. I also think of the Manatu, the Tagata Pulotu. As soon as they see a structure going up, they probably think, you know, so part of my question has to be is bringing the locals along. You've talked a lot about engaging the community, which is excellent. Not knowing or knowing is just as important. The study of the waves and so on. To the common person like me, I now have a lot more appreciation, wind and so on. So it's great to see the community, a lot more of the community getting involved. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that.
Rồi Annette, what do you have Joe? Joanna, go away.
Whalawhalai atu ki he tō mtakainanga kua Liuvaie a tau tolu ki he māmea nei, mua atu ki a koe mawhata ko ni, Anthony, kawile he mahaki. Yeah, I think I I asked the question just as Alana said something, and I think we can all vouch for that. I just wanted to endorse on what you were talking about, the Omama, and how it was a great shelter for those when the cyclone hit last time in Liuvaie. And quite a few times that was their shelter and the strength that it had. A very good model to see, and also your presentation today is just amazing. That was my question. You know, there are a lot of buildings, well, the main buildings going up in Niue. If you have any contribution to that, yeah, because of this forum, I'm asking that, knowing very well, you know, they already have measures in place. Yeah, I hear who got koe hawa fai whakatautunuanga mai na kai e whatuwhono ke mga hone tausi to kumi hau o ke kumi atu noi ka ha ko pihe e te whakaranga tau tore motu.
No, the support, I did get quite a lot of support when I went back home to do my field research from the government. But the main driving, I guess, with my research was just my personal interest in try and contribute to how to make I guess our lives better back home. So in terms of that, like it's obviously it's a bit of a balance because there was a lot of sort of myself reaching out, but there was willingness from the government to help me out, and there was a lot of help from Niue when I went over, the Niuean government, and also some of the Niuean people who went over, including Inna interviewed me, did a BCN, so so no, there was definitely support, and I know that there is a willingness for them to be involved in this project. It's just a matter of I think it's a matter of me reaching out again and potentially going back home to present this information that I've got, and then how we can proceed moving forward in terms of putting I guess strategies in place to hopefully make this happen.
Yeah, my long of they have a lot of buildings back home that they've done, like the stone houses. Yeah, for example. Yeah, thank you. Munuini do amamna kiang hau.
Well, you can put the whatever.
Yeah, good to see you.
Welahi majau ki hawa po manako ki tuku atu kia Jess e mga hane whaihuhua koe ki tuku atu kia Anthony.
Yeah, whakauwelahi for your presentation, Anthony. I just wanted to, I don't really know too much about vernacular architecture, but I wanted to ask you if there is anything in there or in that space that kind of challenges the expectation or the priority of permanent structures, and if there's, you know, something, you know, if there's a part of these structures that you're thinking about, from homes to offices, if there's parts of it that should or shouldn't be permanent, and kind of your thinking about materials in that way.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of, I guess, permanent versus not permanent, so with this design framework, like part of, I guess, bringing back to vernacular architecture, or as for our files, we used just use Niue to cover it up. And in terms of I guess non-permanent, so that will be, for example, roofing will be just covered in that thatching, which is fine, because if that blows off, for example, then that's not going to hurt anyone, first of all, and secondly, that's something that we can continue to put on without, and that's something that we can locally source, you know, like just if it does get ripped off, we can just replace it instead of introducing stuff like corrugated iron, which obviously we have to source that from outside, export that, import it in, and so it's just a matter of looking at in terms of temporary and permanent with the external shelf is using temporary materials. So it's, I guess, a more sustainable approach in the sense that we can keep reusing it, but it just means obviously a bit more labor intensive. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, mafaluteka Jess. What care? Ko whanau ke matakai hatu tō ko ke Rob. Rob, if you would like to share some of your thoughts. E lolonga nana ke e Rob. Whaihuhu whoki na kai i mga honi. While we're waiting, koe huhuha ko ma Anthony. Just following on what Joe had mentioned earlier about the whale makaga and also the whale punga hatu tūru I Niue. During your research, did you find anything, because I know when we look at the walls at the aongai kofi, that the walakawhika and things like that were actually woven, and then the punga was kind of like attached to it.
Yep.
Do you find anything in here, research over the whakamuti here?
Yeah, definitely. I think with my research, what I learned in hindsight and also feedback was that there's so much more that I missed in terms of my research because I only had a year to do the whole thing. And part of that was my interviews with the matuas. And that itself, I can see as having its own separate path and documentation. The information I got from them around whare punga, that's the first time I've learned about it. And it's interesting to see the process of that because whare punga was something that quite big to Niue, as well with the whare tapus. And the process of making punga, like I learned that, back then they used to, which Jakuri was saying that they used to have massive umu pits and they used to just burn limestone to use it to plaster it. And one of the other things was using kawhika. I can't remember the term, so correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's called kisi or something like that. I think where they weave the kawhika and then basically plaster the limestone on it. And that term is used, that process is actually used now in the construction industry, which is called plastering. And it's basically the same principle of having a mesh, which is and then you plaster something on it because the mesh actually binds everything together. So that's one interesting learning, I guess, in aside from my interviews with the matuas, was around that and how that was done back then. And then now you can see that, as a common construction method in New Zealand.
And you also mentioned earlier on in your presentation for that site at Liuvaie that one way of being more resilient is actually planting more trees. Were there any particular discussions about what types of trees, indigenous species, or is that something that's outside of the scope of your research?
Yeah, that was definitely something outside of the research. Like again, what I've learned is that 1 year is not enough to tackle all these issues. So one of the feedbacks that I got from my reviewers and also my, their official reviews from my supervisor was that there's like, if I guess the urban side, which is Liuvaie, that could have been its own separate research, and then the architecture side could have been its own research. So I think in that sense, I tried to tackle too much, which meant that I only managed to touch on the surface of these items. For example, the trees. I guess the next step will be looking into what kind of trees would you build would grow well in the coastal areas. And I did actually touch on that in my field studies back home when we did the engagement with some of the government workers. Was that talk about trees, and then they came up with some of the trees that actually grows really well in the coastal edge. I think I can't remember on the top of my head, but I do have a list of some of the trees that can grow well in those areas.
Whakaue. Whaihuhu whoke a Marie, so sa Marie whaihuhu laftilunga whoke a Nuhi. So, Marie, you've unmuted yourself. Did you have a question?
No, I was still unmuted from earlier. No, I'm done. Thank you, Ina.
Okay,
No,
then.
I'm good.
All right. Tukuitonga kia Nuhi. Whakaue.
Anthony, earlier in your presentation, you talked, you've referred to some of the houses in Niue as abandoned houses. And so I just wanted to raise the issue around, you know, referring to the houses as abandoned houses, because in fact, the houses kind of reflect the situation for many of us that left Niue, that we were not able, or our parents or grandparents were not able to maintain two homes, one in New Zealand and one in Niue. And so, of course, the homes in New Zealand became the priority. And so I suppose my question is, if you were able to find, you know, use your model, that model house to encourage people to be able to afford to go back to Niue and, you know, and build or redo the homes that they had to leave, then I think that would be really great, because people, you know, the cost of building on Niue and still living in New Zealand is really prohibitive for many families, and that's why they, you know, the homes just sit there. But, you know, in terms of referring to these homes as abandoned, I just think we also need to remember that people left because, you know, there were better opportunities, or parents thought there were better opportunities in New Zealand. And of course, families couldn't afford to maintain two homes. But if there's a way that people can go back and fix their homes in Niue at an affordable cost, I think, you know, there's an opportunity there for you to maybe assist in terms of the model of the house that you're looking at, or the one that you've designed. I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. And there's obviously a fair enough comment, and it's an ongoing, I guess, issue as well. I guess that the photos itself was sort of, and the purpose of me showing that was obviously to show the current situation that we're in, and the reality of it is that, like you said, a lot of people, us Niueans, we've moved overseas, and we've sort of made New Zealand our primary home, and we want to, which means that we can't do much with the kainas back home. So there is a potential, I guess, to look into providing, because it seems to me that when we go back to Niue, we want to go back to stay for a couple of years, or sorry, you know, just temporarily, just for holiday, or just for a few months before we go back. So potentially looking at providing, you know, like I'll call it a pavilion, or some sort of just enough footprints to, you know, to sleep in, because you don't really need much, I don't think, back home, because I still believe the connection to the outside is so important, and we don't want to be confined to a four wall. So with the design in mind, like it's again reconnecting back to the outside and just having a space to sleep, and also, yeah, sleep in. So definitely there is a potential for that, and pursuing that.
Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, whakawelahi manuhi. Whaihuhu wa kai Malala. I'd like to hand it over to Lala. Lala has a question.
Yes, sorry. So do you see this sort of architecture working long term against the natural elements on a smaller scale, for the homes of individuals, obviously, because we were talking about how there were dilapidated houses in Niue and people weren't able to move back into them. Do you think that this is something that could work with that as well?
I definitely think yes. I guess in terms of affordability, like if we can grow locally sourced material from back home, that removes the need. That's a whole cost really removed from like importing materials from overseas. So there definitely is. I was just looking to how do we I guess use some of the local resources, or if we're going to use bamboo, how is that going to sort of work and back home? And if we're able to, I guess the best case scenario is that we can grow that, and we can just say you go back home, you plant that, go back home in a couple of years, it's ready, and you just build it, and then that's your and in terms of just making it last, there's methods of making bamboo last, which has been tested in some of my case studies I've done, and they just steam it, which removes all the, and they treat it so there's no, so it doesn't get, so it doesn't rot over time and such. So it gives it about 20 years lifespan. I think it's still, I think that's quite good.
Also, I have one more question. Do you feel that, because a lot of people think that bamboo is an invasive plant, is that a worry of yours?
That is, yes. Thanks for that question. There's actually one of the obviously the cons of if we were to go down that bamboo path. Is it like how? Because I wouldn't know how it will grow in Niue. There's a certain species that you use for construction of the building, and I'm not. That's part that I can't answer, and that I haven't looked into it, and if that's going to be an invasive species, because that could potentially be an issue, and that's what was brought up during my field study as well. Was like that's an issue that could be something that might become an issue. But in terms of overall, I guess the proposal and the design is sort of I guess it's a systematic change as such, which obviously is going to be a big shift in order for this to happen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that. That was some really good questions there.
Do we have any other questions? We had, okay, so Rob had posted in our chat that he just wanted to say thank you, Anthony, for your presentation. He said that he's excited and inspired by what you've shared, and particularly the aesthetics of the design. So that was from Rob.
Right.
And also just from observation from the images that you had for the Whaleawhai, the abandoned houses. But when you look at those images, those buildings are still standing, and the only reason they are in that state is because the roofs have been removed because they had asbestos and things like that.
Yeah.
So obviously the architecture behind that was quite solid. Any thoughts on how we could convert those existing structures, and probably blend it with the design that you've got?
Are you referring to the traditional housing that I showed, those photos?
Ito Whaleawhai, the houses that are just left unoccupied in the villages.
Oh, okay. So can you just I'm just trying to understand the question.
Because I know that a lot of people are quite attached to these particular houses because the foundations and the land and all of that the families put into it. Is there any way that you could still have maybe the foundation and then have your design?
I mean, definitely. I think like I would say to be honest, I think that this, like, for something like this to happen, it requires it's a big change. It's a big sort of systematic change in the way we think and the way we do things, and part of that could potentially be, like as again, if I were to emphasize the new way, like it's sort of introducing a new way for us to build, and part of that is obviously, I wouldn't say losing, but like starting from the foundation, literally, in this instance, upwards, and like whether we need to remove all that and just reintroduce this new concept of living back home, and it's sort of with the design, like it's sort of going back to where we started and how we used to live, of just having a space to sleep, but still having that connection to the outdoor space. So that's my perspective on it. Yeah.
Zora, or more? Did you want to ask a question or?
Yeah. Hi, Anthony. Thank you for your talk. It was really amazing. I was just wanting to ask, what do you think the next, what is your plan going forward? Like, I've just written down next steps, plans, design team, Niue government support, community meetings and presentations. I mean, it's a really big, huge plan, and it's, you know, there's a lot of people who would support an action going forward, and I don't know, but that's what I wanted to ask you. Thank you.
Yeah. In terms of the next steps, definitely. Well, what I need to do is go back home and basically do this presentation, and because and basically present the findings, what I found, and then take it from there. To be honest, I haven't focused too much on further, I guess, anything more than that, because I've just focused on work experience in New Zealand, just to get some sort of experience around before I can look into going with the next steps of initiating the project or the research into a real life project. So that's the next step for me. Short term is to present to the Niue government and to go back and present, and then from then on, obviously getting the support, and then we'll sort of kind of start from there. But I haven't thought as far long term, just because I'm trying to focus on the just, I guess, the career for now, to get some sort of experience and backing. Yeah.
I think there's a real opportunity to, you've got a lot of support. I mean, this group really supports you. So, yeah, just know that there's a lot of people who would support a Niue and young man doing the work on Niue. Yeah. And thank you for that. Thank you for that, Ina.
No, thanks. We're late.
Zora. Liuvaie Lela,
yeah, hi. So I have one more question. Obviously, the structure is visually very pleasing. Do you feel that with this, it will draw attention from the tourism industry, given that it's got the same sort of structural elements as our traditional houses, but it's obviously been a little bit more westernized, it's a bit more model, and it's on a larger scale?
Definitely, that's with a lot of this is my understanding of other like other buildings around the world, especially there's one in New Caledonia. When they focus on themselves and what, I guess, how does architecture reflect their culture in New Caledonia, there's a building there, and part of the reason why it's people go there is to see the architecture. And I think for this, by looking at what does Niue represent, what does Niue bring to the table, with the design, obviously, it will be the tourism will be a byproduct of this vernacular architecture, because I guess people haven't seen it before. So naturally, for tourism wise, it's great, because people will probably want to go back and just, people are curious, to see see and feel what this looks like, and take pictures potentially, like it's. But that's the great thing about looking within, because we look at our own identity and how we can show that in a building form, for example. And that's where I see this as, I guess, the tourism side is a sort of byproduct of the design, and does that make sense?
No, yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Cool. That's a good question. Thank you.
Okay, whakawelahi malela. Whai manatu whuki na kai ko whakausi hatatula whakatutaanga. Just one more opportunity if you have any pressing issues, observations, or any questions for Anthony. I don't see any hands going up. Okay. Okay. Manako ke tuka te whakaue kia kai ma Anthony, ha koe hawa tau kumkumianga, moe hawa tau langmatai mai ki whalawhala mai e te kumkumianga ia. Si amanaki ni tō matutaki atu me pāru ha te tūra te matutaki kia kai, ka whai huhula ki lunga. So thank you very much, Anthony, for your presentation. I'd like to hand it over to Zora Feilo, just to give us some last few closing remarks before we finish our session for today. Unmute la whamalima.
Thanks, Ina. Okay, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's joined us today in the Pulotu seminars. This is brought to us by the Ministry of Pacific People, Unitec Pacific Centre and Tupumaiaga Trust, and Dr. Colin Tukuitonga, Dr. Nuhisifa-Williams, and Io Aleke Whawai. So just thank you to everyone who's come to be a part of it today. And thank you, Anthony, for all your work, and keep going. We support you 100%. Thank you for being part of our Pulotu talks. Manuina mahi atua, awetalo.
Zora. And before we finish, I just want to remind us that the final presentation seminar next week will be on Friday, 16th July, based on the Kalo, and that will be presented by Sam Pilisi, Ioane Aleke Whawai, and Leki Jackson Burke. Liunie tuku atu tau whakauwela maha ki ke tatu ruasi ko tuku mai te mga aho, mo e whakauwe kia koe ma Anthony ki hao te malolo, Tita whalu matakainanga he ole mai, ke maua hawa I meli, o matutaki atu pihia. Manako ke ole atu ki he tatu o Giovanna, ai ke naka koe whakamale moli, ke pā me whakausi tatu o whakawanga ke he rua.
Kauela he mahaki whakausi ke he liongi hu Feilo a tau tōru ki mui atua me liongi. Ha mautolu matua nai haelangi, hanei a mautolu kua liwa ki atu ha mautolu a tau namanga me tau whakau ki mu hao, ha koe hawa loto matala kua tuku ke he taha ha mautolu a tau whuata he motu ke whakalaulahi mai ki he māmeha hanei. Whakau ke he tau puhala mitakia kua whakakise mai, mo e whakalaulahi mai ke iloa ke he whanaanga nei. Haere mai, whangataha ma mautolu, whamuina ke ia, se pihia ke alo tulosi kua mai ke whanongonongo mo kise ke he māmeha nei. Ko e tau o whanga nono whamau ha mautolu, taha hawa whakalofa mo e taha hawa whamuinanga, ha kua o hoko mai a mautolu ke he whakausianga, ke mga hanei ke he hao hingoa kua hulalo, mo e liongi atua i a mautolu ki ai. Amen.
Amen.
Manuina.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.